If you ask most people today about the Crusades, you'll hear the same old story, that it was a brutal, greedy invasion, that it was the Catholic Church trying to conquer the world, that it was all about power, money, and blind hatred. But what if I told you that almost everything you've heard about the Crusades is wrong? Today, we're going to uncover the truth about one of the most misunderstood chapters in Catholic history, and why the real story of the Crusades is nothing like the myth you've been told. First, let's set the record straight. The Crusades were not about conquest. They were not about greed. They were not some Catholic empire-building project. They were a response, a desperate last resort defense. For centuries before the First Crusade, Christian lands had been under relentless attack. The Islamic caliphates had expanded rapidly, not through peaceful dialogue, but through invasion and conquest. By the 8th century, Muslim forces had conquered Christian North Africa, the Middle East, and even parts of Spain. Cities that had once been centers of Christian life, like Jerusalem, Antioch, Alexandria, fell under Islamic rule. Churches were destroyed. Pilgrims were harassed, taxed heavily, or killed. Christians living under Muslim rule were often treated as second-class citizens, barely tolerated, sometimes violently persecuted. And then, in the 11th century, things got worse. A new, more aggressive Muslim empire, the Seljuk Turks, swept into the Holy Land. They captured Jerusalem. They attacked Christian pilgrims. They threatened the Byzantine Empire, the last great stronghold of Christianity in the East. Desperate, the Byzantine emperor sent a plea for help to the Catholic West. He begged the Pope, Pope Urban II, to send aid, and the Pope listened. In 1095, at the Council of Clermont, Pope Urban II called the First Crusade. But what he called for was not a war of conquest. It was a pilgrimage, an armed pilgrimage. He called upon Catholic knights and nobles to lay down their petty wars against each other, to put aside their feuds and ambitions, and to fight for a cause greater than themselves, to reclaim the Holy Land, to defend their fellow Christians, to protect the places where Christ himself had walked. It was a call to sacrifice, not to gain, and thousands answered. The men who joined the First Crusade were not adventurers looking to get rich. In fact, most crusaders lost everything. They sold their land, they borrowed heavily, they left their families behind, all to make a dangerous, grueling journey across thousands of miles of hostile territory. The mortality rate was staggering. It's estimated that only about 1 in 4 crusaders ever made it back home. This was not a path to fortune. It was a path of hardship, suffering, and almost certain death. They went not because they expected wealth, but because they believed they were answering a sacred call. The First Crusade was brutal, yes. Wars always are. When the Crusaders finally reached Jerusalem in 1099, after years of marching and fighting, they stormed the city. And yes, there was bloodshed. It was a siege, and medieval sieges were always brutal, whether Christian or Muslim. But the idea that the Crusades were uniquely cruel is simply false. In fact, by the standards of medieval warfare, the Crusaders' conduct was not unusually savage, and often it was far more restrained than people realize. Many Crusaders showed mercy. They ransomed prisoners, they protected civilians, and they treated Muslim and Jewish communities within the Crusader states with more tolerance than Muslims had often shown Christians under Islamic rule. The world was violent on all sides, and no one, Christian, Muslim, or otherwise, was innocent of that reality. Over the next 2 centuries, there would be more crusades. Some noble, some confused, some successful, many not. But at the heart of all of them was the same basic truth. The Crusades were defensive wars. They were efforts to protect Christian lives, to defend sacred places, to respond to centuries of aggression. Not wars of unprovoked aggression, not mindless hatred, but survival. And yet in modern times, the Crusades have been twisted into a symbol of Catholic guilt. We are told we must apologize. We are told we must hang our heads in shame. We are told the Crusaders were monsters. But this is not history. This is propaganda. It's a way to tear down the Catholic Church. by rewriting its past. Because if you can convince a people that their ancestors were evil, it's easier to convince them that their faith is evil too. The truth is far more complicated and far more inspiring. The Crusaders were not perfect. They were human. They sinned. They failed. They made terrible mistakes. But they also fought for something greater than themselves. They fought to defend Christendom when the world they loved was under siege. And that matters because history is not a simple story of good guys and bad guys. It's a story of sinners and saints, of pride and sacrifice, of broken men trying and often failing to live out the radical call of the gospel in a brutal, fallen world. Today we live in a world that mocks sacrifice, that mocks courage, that mocks the idea that some things are worth fighting for. The world tells us faith should be private, quiet, hidden. The Crusaders believed the opposite. They believed faith was worth living for and even dying for. Not because they hated others, but because they loved the truth, because they believed that Christ was not just another prophet, another good man, another option among many. They believed he was king, the Lord of history, the Savior of the world, and they were willing to stake their lives on it. The Crusades are misunderstood because the modern world misunderstands what it means to believe in something greater than yourself. But if you look past the lies, past the propaganda, you'll see something beautiful. A broken, struggling church full of broken, struggling people who still dared to fight for what mattered most. The Crusades are not a cause for shame. They are a call to remember what courage, loyalty, and faith really look like. And maybe, just maybe, we need that spirit again today.